Hello and welcome to our third episode here in season one. We are exploring the question, am I the toxic one? And in today's episode, we're going to cover what does it really mean if you're seriously considering if you are the toxic one? So if you haven't seen it, we've done a couple episodes before this. I've got a little bit different setup for the camera today. So let's see if you like the way this looks compared to the other two episodes. If you've been following along, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your feedback. So let's go ahead and dive in. Yes. All right. So for those of you who are new, my name's Louise Williams. I am the founder and CEO of Empowerment Through Thought. We are a philosophical coaching business dedicated to helping those navigating toxic relationships overcome brain fog and build the life that they deserve. Now, it's important that you know I'm not a mental health professional. I have been trained as a philosopher. So please take my ideas and advice accordingly. So last week we covered why we might be wondering if we're the toxic ones. Now, from our results last week, we saw that sometimes we might be worrying about that because we are authentically concerned about problems with our own behavior. But often, because toxic people try to convince us that we are the problem, that's a way they try to achieve their own goals, right? So toxic people will try to convince us that we're the problem in order for the toxic people to get what they want in their little world. So why we might be wondering, sometimes it's because we want to know, but sometimes it's because somebody is up to no good, right? Remember, a top priority for toxic people is to avoid criticism. And the main way they achieve that is by controlling others. So one way they exercise that control is to force us into wondering whether we're the toxic ones. So that's what happened last week. If that was a little too quick, go ahead and watch the episode from last week and you can get caught up. So just as a reminder, kind of where we are, where we're going here in season one, here's a little roadmap. So the first topic we covered was the difference between being a toxic person versus just occasionally engaging in toxic behavior. Next, we covered why we might be wondering if we are the toxic ones. Today we're going to explore what it means if you're seriously considering that you are the toxic ones. And next week, we're going to cover what you can do to determine once and for all if you are the toxic one. Okay, so that's just kind of to locate us here in season one in our exploration of the question, am I the toxic one? So just like last time, this presentation is going to be divided up into three different parts. We're going to do some theory. I'm going to give you kind of the theoretical answer to these questions. And then we're going to go into some real world examples, make that more concrete. And then in the end, I'm going to give you a couple action items, things you can do to start developing your own answers to these questions, right? I'm a philosopher. I want you to develop your own ideas. This isn't about me telling you how the world's organized. This is about me giving you some frameworks to kind of help discover how you think the world is organized for yourself. So what's going on here? What does it mean if you're seriously considering if you are the toxic one? Well, to answer this week's question, we're going to need to pull on some of the big ideas from the last 2 weeks of the season. So in order to help us do that, if you haven't seen those or you only got to briefly engage with those episodes, I'm just going to quickly review the pieces from those previous lectures that were important. If anything I say here feels confusing or it's too fast or you just like disagree with it straight up and you want to know more about why I'm saying the things I'm saying, please go review episodes 1 and 2 of season 1. So first off, we have to make this clarification again. We got to ask ourselves, like, who are we even talking about when we're talking about toxic people? Who are those folks? Well, I use the term toxic people in a specific way. I use it as a blanket term for folks who have cluster B personality disorders. So, if you want to know all of the personality disorders in that camp, you can go look that up. But, some classic examples from this family are narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. So toxic people in my book are folks who have personality disorders. So what are some of the key features of toxic people? Well, they're usually very insecure. They usually cannot tolerate criticism of any kind. These folks often dedicate a lot of their energy to avoiding criticisms by trying to control other folks, right? They're in the business of controlling the people around them so that they can better achieve their own goals. Toxic people often focus on creating a narrative where they are the perfect ones and everything that is bad is because of others. Right now, I want to just point out that's usually kind of like morally perfect. So toxic folks might create a martyrdom narrative or this idea that they're the victim. All of that is still trying to say that they're the morally right ones and everyone else is doing the morally wrong stuff. We talked about a lot of these features in the last episode, so go check out that one if this is confusing. So there's a couple different things that might be going on if you're asking yourself, am I the toxic one? You might be wondering if you have a personality disorder, or you might just be wondering if you sometimes engage in toxic behavior. We talked about these differences in the first episode of season 1. Remember, it's normal for everyone to occasionally engage in toxic behavior. There's more going on for toxic people. So when you're asking yourself this question, if you're wondering if you're the toxic person, you are fundamentally wondering if there is something wrong about you, right? It doesn't matter if you're considering, oh, do I have a personality disorder? Whether you're considering, oh, do I just sometimes do it, like engage in toxic behavior? Either way, you're fundamentally wondering if something's wrong about the way that you're treating people, the way that you're interacting in the world. Now remember, toxic people cannot tolerate criticism. Can't do it. It's not for them. Toxic people cannot seriously entertain the idea that there is something wrong about them. Toxic people tend to go to great lengths to build a narrative where they are the perfect ones. So when you're wondering if you're the toxic one, you are already engaged in an activity that is fundamentally opposed to the core characteristics of toxic people. You're already doing something that real toxic people they can't stomach, they can't palate that. You are looking critically at the behaviors you have engaged in, or you're looking hard. What did I do then? Why did I do that? What was that the right thing to do? Is that how I should treat other people? You're looking critically at your own actions. You're also considering that maybe the core of some of the problems in your life are stemming from your actions, from your behavior, right? You're thinking maybe I'm part of the reason this stuff keeps happening. When you're authentically engaging in the question, am I toxic? You're not deflecting criticisms. You're not running away from them. You're looking at them. You're facing them head on. You're saying, let me see, is that right? Let me think about that. You are not controlling the narrative in order to make yourself look perfect, right? If you're seriously considering this question, you are inherently open to the idea, maybe I am not perfect. Maybe something is going on here that I need to work on. Also, you are not focusing your energy on controlling others. This is an inward activity when you ask this question, am I toxic? It's not about signaling things to your friends. It's not about, being able to answer something to your family members or your boss or something like that. It's just about you reflecting on yourself and you being interested in your own ability to improve. So what does it mean if you're seriously considering if you are the toxic one? Well, if you're really authentically investigating the question for yourself, then you're probably not a toxic person. Toxic people cannot tolerate the possibility that they are the source of the problems in their lives, right? They're so insecure. Their whole show is about trying to soothe their insecurities. It's not about becoming a better person. It's not about doing better by other people. It's all about running away from the things that are difficult, right? So this isn't the kind of activity toxic people can really seriously do. So it's not like a slam dunk. The situation's a little complicated, but if you really are authentically engaging in this question, that's some evidence that you're not a toxic person. Okay, it's a bit trickier, right? I keep using these words like authentically investigate or seriously consider. There is a way to wonder whether you are the toxic one in a superficial way, right? So we've got this meaty, authentic, this serious investigation into this question, and then we've got the little cutesy superficial version. So let's talk about what this other version kind of looks like. Folks who are superficially engaged in the question, am I the toxic one? They're not really considering that they are the source of the problems in their lives. Superficial engagement means that you just really aren't very critically evaluating your behaviors. You're not really looking inward. You're not really saying, oh, did I mess up there? No, that's not what the superficial engagement looks like. Now, sometimes toxic people do superficially engage with this question. Toxic people have this ability. They often superficially engage in apparently important questions. So why do they do this? Well, if the toxic person either thinks that appearing to consider this question will help them better control other people. Right? So if the toxic person thinks that appearing to consider this question will help them reach their goal of controlling others, they might superficially consider, am I the toxic one? Or maybe these toxic people are forced by circumstances to consider the question, right? They're in a conversation and they can't help but try to respond to this question. Usually toxic people wouldn't let themselves get into that situation. But it's possible that they would be forced by circumstance to at least superficially consider the question. So what do? They're not doing the kind of soul-searching deep work that us non-toxic people might do when we're looking at a problem in our own behavior. Instead, toxic folks usually engage in the question in this superficial way. This means they're typically quick to dismiss any evidence that they might be toxic, right? They look at like, okay, this one time I did this thing, but no, I was just, I was hungry that day. I was hungover that day. Like that doesn't count. That doesn't count, right? They'll find whatever pieces of evidence, either that they discover in themselves, which they're not looking very hard, but if they stumble into something, they'll dismiss it. If somebody else brings them a piece of evidence, like, oh, you really made me feel like crap that day, they're going to just dismiss it, right? They're going to find some way to excuse it because they're not interested in actually seriously looking and considering that they might be the problem. Often these folks are really eager, right? Their whole goal in this conversation is to shift the focus from looking inward and considering whether you might be causing some problems and instead working to blame others, right? I was a jerk to you because you were a jerk to me. It's really your fault. It's your fault that this happened. Right? They want to shift to blaming others and they want to paint themselves as the victim. Right? They want to be seen like, oh, woe is me. Everyone else is so cruel and mean and I am perfect in every way. Toxic people find ways to avoid reflecting on this question of am I the toxic one? They want to avoid it as much as possible. I'd say they want to avoid it like the plague, but here in the era of COVID, I'm not sure how useful that phrase is, apparently. But these folks are going to try to avoid really seriously considering this question as much as they possibly can. Remember, toxic people cannot tolerate criticism. They cannot stomach the possibility that they are the source of the problems in their lives. They can't do it, don't want to, run away from it as much as possible. Seriously investigating whether they are the toxic ones would require that they challenge their fundamental characteristics, right? Defining feature of a lot of toxic people is that they can't handle criticism. When you think about this question, am I the toxic one? You necessarily wonder, is the problem me? am I creating some of this? Toxic people aren't having that. Toxic people are very insecure, and they are generally incapable of this kind of scary, deep work, right? This line of thinking might also be some of the reasons toxic people struggle to make a lot of progress in therapy and in other contexts, where to make a lot of progress, you have to be willing to face this kind of darkness that toxic folks carry around. These kind of people generally don't have the stomach for it. So if you are seriously considering this question, right, you're not running away from it, you're not like finding evidence and immediately dismissing it, but you're seriously looking inward and trying to understand the nature of the problems that are being created in your life, then you are probably not a toxic person. Now, of course, you may still sometimes engage in toxic behaviors, right? It might be those initial toxic behaviors that have gotten you into this question, right? You see a bit of evidence that you are creating some problems. Now, we can talk about whether the kinds of problems you're creating are going to reach the level of a toxic behavior, because that's still pretty serious. Sometimes we engage in problematic behavior that doesn't get to the level of toxic. But remember, we can all sometimes, and as a human being, you most likely have and will probably in the future engage in a toxic behavior in some capacity, right? So that's not off the table. But whatever thing has gotten you to consider this question, if you are asking it for yourself, that behavior is probably not rising to the level where you have like a full-blown personality disorder. Folks with these kinds of disorders just tend not to be able to ask these questions. So if you want to remember some of this, right, this is the theory part. This is like some of the most abstract stuff that we talk about. I just want to remind you that in addition to this YouTube over this week, there's going to be a series of blog posts that will be going live over on my website. That's empowermentthroughthought.com. There's going to be posts throughout the week that are going to provide notes and a summary of all the different parts of this YouTube. You can find the link for that in the description box below. And I do want to remind you, if you go to my website, you can also sign up on our email newsletter, and you'll also get updates about those blog posts if you don't want to keep checking in on the site yourself. So check that out. I know for me, I'm a visual learner, but I really love having some notes. So you can find all of that done for you over on the blog. Okay, let's switch to the next part. We're going to talk about some real world examples. So all that stuff we went through was kind of abstract. So I want to make it more concrete for us and actually walk us through what this looks like in the real world. So I'm creating these examples just like I have the past couple of weeks. We're going to use our same characters. We're going to have Cindy, who's going to be our toxic person. We're going to have Jesse, who is a non-toxic person. These examples are based on my personal experience with toxic people, along with the information I've gotten from people I've worked with here at Empowerment Through Thought. So these are not tracking any particular people in my life. This is just an example I created that's inspired by real things that have happened. Okay, so here's our scenario for this week. We're gonna have Jesse and Cindy independently consider the question, am I the toxic one? Right, so last week we had the two interacting with each other. This week we're just gonna have Jesse in his own world, and we're gonna have Cindy in her own world. All right, let's do it. So Cindy finds reasons to ask, am I the toxic one? So let's say Cindy has heard through the grapevine, right, through maybe a little bit of the rumor mill, that some colleagues, some of her coworkers, we'll call them Jeremy and Lydia. These two folks have begun describing her as toxic. Now, they haven't done it to her face, but she's heard through the grapevine, or she's heard through other people that they're starting to talk about her this way. Now, Cindy wants immediately, right, as soon as she hears it, she's just like jumps to it. She wants to do everything she can to regain control of the narrative these colleagues are crafting. She does not want these people out here saying things about her in any way that she doesn't have maximum control over. She's not having it. She believes that the best way to approach this issue with Jeremy and Lydia is to paint herself as the victim of these coworkers' vicious attacks. She accomplishes this by expressing to everyone who will listen that she has been worrying and thinking very seriously about whether she might be toxic. Right? She's acting like, oh, I'm really thinking hard about this. Oh, I'm really taking what these folks are telling me really seriously. Her goal is to portray these coworkers as bullies, who they're just like these people who have something against Cindy. They have no evidence for the claim. So Cindy wants to create this narrative where she's thinking really hard about it, and she keeps like reflecting on all these different things, and it's really messing her up. And it turns out that like she can't find any truth at all to any of it. And oh, aren't these people so horrible? So this is a situation where Cindy kind of needs to, in some way, investigate the question, am I the toxic one, right? She's specifically trying to regain control of a narrative where people are calling her the toxic one. So she has to come up with some material to kind of work with to sway people into seeing her as the victim. Right. So she wants to convey that she's really worried about this. She wants to communicate to others that she is seriously considering the question. So, of course, we know she's toxic. She can't really tolerate doing anything about this question in a serious way. So her approach is to look for potential pieces of evidence that she is toxic and find easy ways to dismiss them. So she's going to like think in her own mind, maybe think about some of the experiences she had with Jesse and Lydia, and find ways to show other people like, hey, that thing they're talking about, no, they totally blow it out of proportion. They don't know what they're talking about. It was just like a simple little thing. They're overly sensitive. Raise your hand if you've had a toxic person convey to others that the problem you're having with them is that you're overly sensitive. That's Cindy's kind of strategy here. So at no point in this process is she actually worried that she's toxic. That's not a thing, right? She's worried about controlling a narrative. She's not worried about whether she's toxic or not. She's quite, in some ways, she has this kind of bravado, this fake courage that she's not, this fake conviction that she's not actually toxic. So she doesn't actually worry about that, even though we know she's very insecure, and that's probably something that scares her on some deep level. But on a superficial level, she's like, oh, that's not even a real worry. Don't think too much. Instead, she focuses her energy on using this question to achieve her goal of controlling the narrative, right? Again, this is all about control. This is all about her maintaining a position of power over any potential threats in her environment. So here's some things Cindy says, over the water cooler at work. I don't know. Do people still do water coolers? I don't know. It doesn't, not in the land of pandemic. I don't think we have any virtual water coolers, but okay. This is the stuff she's talking, the kinds of things she might say when she's having casual conversations with her coworkers. One time I spoke a bit harshly to Jeremy, but don't we all act like that when we're having a bad day? Once I told Lydia that she had something on her shirt, but I was only trying to help her look her best before the big meeting with the boss. I really have been thinking hard about the mean things Jeremy and Lydia are saying, and I just don't think there's anything to it. I'm just a regular person, and you don't think I'm toxic, right? You see how there's a little bit of suggestive question leading there in that last one. Right. So she's taking little pieces of evidence, little experiences she had with these folks, and trying to say like, oh, it was no big deal. They don't know what they're talking about. So Cindy aims to make Jeremy and Lydia look like they are taking very ordinary events and turning them into something outrageously negative. In doing this, Cindy accomplishes two different things. First, she downplays the bad things that she has done to Jeremy and Lydia. Second, she portrays herself as the victim of some office bullying, right? Everyone should pity poor me because these people are saying horrible things about me, and there's no reason for them to say that. Notice, at no point in this process is Cindy seriously entertaining the idea that she may be in any way toxic. The most she does is find a couple pieces of potential evidence and find quick ways to dismiss them. And she conveys those quick dismissals to her coworkers. Okay, so now let's switch to Jesse. Jesse's over here considering the question, am I the toxic one? Jesse has begun to notice some patterns in his own behavior. These patterns are making him wonder if perhaps he is contributing to some of the most difficult situations in his life, right? So he started off from this point of looking inward and noticing he keeps doing a couple of these things, and they seem to be connected to some of the issues, right? It's all this inward process. He's heard of the phrase toxic people before, and he begins to consider whether this might accurately describe him, right? So he's taking some other information he's gotten and he's using that to reflect inward. Jesse begins to reflect on the way he handled the difficult situations in his life recently. He notices that many of these problems seem to have become more challenging when he reacted to the initial situation by raising his voice, right? So that's the pattern we're going to focus on with Jesse. When he's in stressful situations, when difficult things have happened, he raises his voice. Here, Jesse's approach is to authentically reflect on his behavior and look for things he is doing that either create the initial problem or exacerbate the problem. So Jesse wants to discuss some of these issues with people he trusts. He's interested in getting some feedback, right? One of the challenges when you're doing this kind of inner work is it's hard to kind of keep perspective and keep in mind what things were really problematic and what things just kind of felt like a big deal. So Jesse's aware of that. He really wants to go to some people he trusts and really talk it out with them and hear some of their perspective on maybe some of the things he's noticing about himself. So when he goes into these conversations, here's a couple examples of the things Jesse might say. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I think I might have a tendency to raise my voice when I get frustrated, right? He's just identifying the thing that he's noticed. I don't know exactly what to make of it, but I have been thinking about whether I might be toxic. Have you ever had that thought? Right? So he's bringing it out that he might, he's worrying about this question, but he leaves it very open-ended to the people that he's communicating with. Just, have you ever considered this? Do you have any experience with this question? I've been working on doing some self-improvement stuff. I'm trying to figure out if I do any toxic stuff. I'd appreciate it if you have any thoughts on this. It's hard to figure it out from the inside, Right? He's not asking any leading questions. He's not saying, you don't think this about me, do you? Right? He's just saying like, oh, if you have any thoughts, I know I'm a little limited in thinking about this completely on my own. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Right? These are all focused on getting some open-ended feedback. Very different than the kind of activity Cindy was engaged in. Jesse is trying to come up with a real answer to the question, am I the toxic one? Right? He really wants to know for himself, what's the answer to this? Is this a thing about me? Is this true about me? He's doing an inner journey kind of thing. He's able to think about potentially being the source of some of his life problems. He can hold on to that. He can consider maybe I'm part of this. And Jesse wants to know. He has an authentic desire to know the answer. It's not he's being forced to ask it. It's not that circumstances brought it up. It's that he is interested in this question for himself. Okay, so that's the basics of what's going on. Now let's just step back a little bit and take a comparison between Cindy and Jesse. Now, Cindy used this question as a tool to control. She's trying to control the narrative. She never looks inward to discover whether she is at the root of these problems. Not interested in that, doesn't want to do that. She uses the question ultimately to help portray herself as a victim, right? This is all about that narrative, right? Where she wants people to see her as the victim, so they pity her and they think, oh, she's never done anything wrong in her life. Now, Jesse, on the other hand, he's trying to investigate the question fully for himself. It's not being prompted by all of these other things. It's just about him trying to figure out what's going on with him. He only brings it up with other people to help get some honest feedback about his behaviors, right? We saw those are open-ended questions. He just wants to get some extra perspective on what's going on. And Jesse, most importantly, he is willing to consider that he might be the cause of these problems. He can entertain that. He's ready to accept, well, maybe I need to change something. Maybe I'm doing something that's making the situation worse than it has to be. Okay, let's step back even more, right? We've got a little bit of analysis there, the major differences and similarities with Jesse and Cindy. So let's look at the big picture. Now, toxic people often use this question, am I the toxic one, as a tool to achieve their goals. It's just one more opportunity for them to control other people and soothe their own insecurities. Non-toxic people who are just wondering if they are the toxic ones engage in a very serious exploration of the nature of their own behaviors. They're really looking critically, they're thinking hard about where the problem might be. They're willing to consider that they are contributing to the problem. This is a big difference between toxic people and non-toxic people when they consider this question, am I the toxic one? Okay, if you're interested in thinking some more about these examples, over the next week, you can find discussions of every part of this presentation of this stuff, this material we're going through, along with some additional exclusives over on our podcast. The podcast episodes are broken into 10 to 20-minute mini episodes, so be sure to check it out. It's not like this chunky YouTube video that goes out. They're little short spigots? I don't think that's the right word, but they're short little bits you can listen to while you're doing the dishes or whatever you got going on in your life. So go ahead and you can find the link to the podcast in the description box below. So let's go on and let's talk about things you can do to start figuring out what it means if you are seriously considering if you are the toxic one. Says, it's big important to me that you guys don't just listen to me. I want you to think about these things on your own and try to discover for yourself what you think is the right way to understand this situation. So the first thing I want you to do is try to identify your goals, right? Sometimes we have goals and we're not super conscious of them. We haven't explicitly stated these goals. So when you're thinking about this question, I want you to kind of help make some of those goals explicit. So remember, when we're talking about Jesse and Cindy, one of the major differences were their goals in asking, am I the toxic ones? When we identify those goals, when we make those goals explicit, we can begin to unpack the real meaning behind your asking this question, am I the toxic one? So I recommend doing this by basically brain dumping. Make a list of all the different reasons you're asking yourself this question. It's okay, just grab a piece of paper, it can be as long or as short as you feel is comfortable, and just write out all of the reasons that this question has become really important to you. These might be some internal reasons, like you're trying to improve yourself. Or they might be external reasons, like you're trying to respond to questions that people in your life keep bringing up. You're probably going to have a mixture of things that you're kind of doing for you and things that you're kind of doing for other people. So just list them all out. And you might want to take some time to do this. I know for me, when I do a big brain dump like this, I like to, first just get a piece of paper and write it all down. And then I'll try to walk away for 20 minutes and I'll come back to it and see if there's anything I missed or I want to add to it, right? You can kind of break this up over a few hours. You can break this up over a few days, whatever feels right to you. Once you have this big brain dump list, then we can kind of analyze your goals list. We can take a look at where maybe the meat and potatoes really are of that big brain dump. So I want you to take a break. Once you make that initial brain dump, once you're happy with it, I want you to go ahead and take a day off or go do something else. I'm sure you're very busy. I'm sure that you can find a way to fill that time. So once you've taken a break, you've got a little bit of distance on the list. I want you to just read over the whole thing. I want you, as you're going through this process, figure out which reasons on that list really resonates with you, or which ones are like the standout ones. You know, the ones that like when you're not looking at the list 20 minutes later, you're thinking like, yeah, that one really makes sense. That one is the one, right? There'll probably be a couple of these, but I want you to identify which ones seem most rich to you. It's okay, whatever reason they stand out for you, that you don't have to explain that part, right? Just if you have a feeling that like that one is more important than the others, I want you to make a note of that. Since you're just doing a big brain dump right in the last step, this second pass is going to show you which of these reasons seem to best capture how you are thinking about the question, am I the toxic one? So we're basically refining that big list that you created in the first step. And once you've put a star by all the ones you like, I want you to grab a fresh piece of paper and just write down the items that really resonated with you. Write down the ones that have the star by them. Once you have this cleaner, simplified list, we're going to start our actual analysis part. So we've done this kind of thing in earlier action items, but basically what I want you to do is go through your list and sort the items into two major categories. The first one is the self-understanding category. So these are the reasons on your list that are all about you learning more about yourself, right? It's you on your journey. It's inward focused. Then I want you to identify which ones are others. They're about others understanding. These are reasons that are all about how you want others to understand you, right? You're worried about how these other people perceive you, how they think about you. So that's about other folks. So you got your other folks category and you got your self-understanding category, things you're really worried about just for you. So sort those two things. You can make two columns if you want. You can rewrite the list. You can put a star. You can color code it, whatever's going to work for you. But sort those things out. And then we can kind of look and see, okay, well, where do you fall on the spectrum, right? If you have more of the self-understanding, if a lot of the reasons for why you're wondering this question really has to do with you kind of looking inward and you want to know some stuff for yourself, then that's probably a sign that you are investigating this question out of an authentic curiosity about the way you might be contributing to problems in your life. If you're focused more on how others perceive you and how others understand you, then you could be more interested in constructing a particular narrative about yourself, right? You're interested in getting other people to think of you in a certain way. And that might be why you're asking this question. Okay, so that's a heuristic, right? If you're more focused on the self-understanding, then you're probably asking this question from a place of authentic reflection. And if you're more focused on how other people see you, then you're probably more focused on constructing a certain narrative and less focused on that inward part. But obviously, you've seen it every time we've done one of these sorting activities, pretty much every time we do any of these action items, it's not just that simple, right? We can't just say like, okay, you've got 4 self-understanding items, therefore you're not a toxic person. Like it's more complicated than that, right? This is to give you a rough sense of where you might be standing in terms of this question. Analyzing your reasons gives you some insight, right? Some into your real motivations behind this question. It's very difficult to analyze our reasons accurately. That's often why seeking the help of someone like a philosophical coach like myself, somebody who is trained to take an objective look at reasons, can be really useful, right? When we're this close to it, when it's something that's like alive in our hearts and in our minds, it can be really difficult to get the perspective we need to really think about, where does this fall on the spectrum? Is it a concern about me or is it a concern about others, right? When you seek the help of somebody who's trained in philosophy, right, one of the main things we do is we try to take an objective stance on different reasons. And we try to unpack like the nature of those reasons. So You can get help from folks like me if you like. You can check out our website for more details. You can get a free consultation with me if you're interested in that. But in any event, this action item exercise in general is just designed to get you to start to consider what are your reasons and kind of what's the motivation? Like, why am I standing by one of those reasons as my entry point into this question, am I the toxic one? So in general, it is inconsistent with the fundamentals of toxic people to seriously investigate whether they are really toxic. It's opposed to the kind of thing that toxic people are. If you are asking this question and you're able to consider that you may really be the source of your problems, you are much more likely to be able to tolerate criticisms, right? Anytime we're willing to think maybe I'm the problem, that's a sign that if somebody says like, hey, you're the problem, we can actually seriously consider that and be like, oh yeah, that's another piece of evidence. Maybe I'm a bit of the problem. So the ability to consider that you are the problem is some evidence that you may not be a toxic person. I'm not going to say it's conclusive. I'm not going to say you should like take that to the bank and, you know, go back to your family and say, absolutely, I am not a toxic person. You were all wrong. Like, I'm not saying that, but it is at least one piece of evidence that you are probably not on team toxic person. Now, you may still be engaging in some toxic behaviors, right? That's a common thing for all human beings to engage in. So that's still very possible. And when your family points out maybe that you do some things that are toxic, what they might be saying, even though they don't have like the formal language for it, they might be saying like, oh, well, you know, once or twice you engaged in a toxic behavior, rather than saying like you have a personality disorder, right? So it's an important distinction to keep in mind. So as always, I have a couple things I want to remind you of. Only a licensed mental health provider can officially diagnose anyone, right? These are individuals who are trained in the DSM to diagnose people who have personality disorders and all of that. I'm not a mental health provider. And unless you are a mental health provider, you should resist the urge to diagnose anyone, because there are reasons people have to have extensive training in doing this kind of work. It is normal for human beings to occasionally engage in toxic behavior. If you're on that inward journey and you're really considering seriously, maybe I'm the source of my problems, you know, what you might discover is that you have certain situations that you typically engage in toxic behavior. That is not a strange thing as a human being. So don't let that make you believe immediately that you must be a toxic person. Don't follow that path. There's some flawed reasoning there. Now, these action items are just designed for you to learn how to reflect on your own experiences. I'm just giving you some structure so that you can start thinking through this question in your own terms. And it's really important to me. I care about you guys. I want you to be safe and happy and healthy as far as you're able. I want you to be mindful of your own mental health and emotional needs as you complete these action items. If you need any additional support, you know, you can seek out. I'm here to support. You can check me out on my website. If you want and need some help with kind of the emotional stuff that's coming up, I recommend seeking out a therapist. If you find yourself in crisis and you've gotten to a moment where you're kind of in a semi-emergency situation, I strongly recommend reaching out to the crisis text line. They have crisis counselors that are there to support you 24/7, so long as you can communicate in English. And you'll find all the information for that in the description box below. So let's step back a little. The question we were asking today, what does it mean if you're seriously considering if you are the toxic one? Well, seriously considering this question requires being open to the idea that you are causing some of the problems in your life, right? Serious consideration is like this rose we have over here. It's open, it's opening itself up so that it can consider, I mean, if it had consciousness, if the rose could think, it's opening itself to the idea that maybe the rose is creating some of the problems in the rose's life, right? Toxic people cannot usually tolerate the idea that they are part of the problem. They're not having it. They can't do it. It's fundamental to the kind of people that they are. Now, I'm not saying they always have to be like that. I think it is theoretically possible for toxic people to change, but in general, toxic people just can't tolerate the idea that they are a part of the problem. So if you are considering this question and you're being open to the fact that you're playing a role in these problems, that is some evidence that you are not a toxic person. So in our next episode, we're going to be continuing the season's topic, Am I the Toxic One? We're going to focus specifically on what you can do to determine once and for all if you are the toxic one. That's a big one. How to just like resolve this question. So be sure to stay tuned for that. If you want to know more about this week's topic, you can check out our blog and our podcast. Please hit us up over on Instagram. I post twice a day over there. We're at Empowerment Through Thought. You can find the links for that, all that's good stuff in the description box. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep up with our topic this month. You're not going to want to miss next week. It's a big one. And thank you so much for joining, and be sure to give a thumbs up if you like this episode. I'm so glad you guys spent some time with me today, and I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.